What if the one moment you stumbled into the woods could change your life forever? Emily never expected to find a buried Mafia boss, but now, she's tangled in a world darker than she ever imagined. Will she escape, or is it already too late? The last thing I expected to find on a lonely night walk was a life-or-death secret buried just beneath my feet. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, the night air thick with the scent of rain and damp earth. She paused. Max, her Neapolitan Mastiff, trotting ahead of her, ears perked. The darkness of the wooded area felt unnervingly silent, save for the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze. Emily looked down at the spot Max had suddenly stopped at, sniffing the ground with an intensity that caught her off guard. She couldn't explain it, but something about this moment felt strange, almost as if they weren't alone. Max whined softly, pulling at the leash, his massive body tense with every step. Emily knelt down to investigate, her hands trembling slightly as she brushed aside the dirt. There, partially hidden, was a corner of something metal, glistening under the faint glow of the distant streetlights. Her breath caught in her throat as she cleared more dirt away, revealing a metal box, tightly sealed. Her fingers scraped against the surface, her mind racing with questions. Who would bury something here? And why? Max began barking furiously, his low growl growing louder as Emily continued to uncover the box. The sound of her heartbeat in her ears was deafening now. The air grew colder, and Emily's instincts screamed at her to leave. Yet her curiosity drove her to dig deeper. Finally, the box gave way, the lid creaking as it was exposed to the open air. Emily gasped as the lid snapped open, revealing the face of a man, unconscious but alive, his features twisted in pain. He looked nothing like anyone she had ever seen, but something about his presence, even in his weakened state, was undeniably powerful. His dark hair, disheveled from the dirt, framed a chiseled face, and his body was muscular despite being buried for what looked like hours. It didn't take long for Emily to realize that this man wasn't just anyone. He was someone dangerous. As he began to stir, his eyes flickered open, locking onto hers with an intensity that made her blood run cold. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The man's lips curled into a grimace as he attempted to sit up, the weight of his gaze never leaving her. "You shouldn't have found me," he said in a low, gravelly voice that sent a shiver down her spine. "But now that you have, you're mine." Emily's heart raced as she stumbled backward, her mind struggling to process the words that left his mouth. She wasn't sure whether to run or stay and help him, but the powerful aura around him made it impossible to move. Her instincts screamed at her to get away, but she couldn't. Not yet. Not when this man was the one thing she never expected to cross her path. A Mafia boss buried alive, now sitting right in front of her, with his eyes set on her future. Emily's thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind, caught between fear and an unexpected connection she couldn't understand. She had just stumbled into a world she never knew existed, and somehow, it had found her. I thought I must be imagining things, but when the man, still half buried in the dirt, fixed his piercing gaze on me, I knew this was real. His deep brown eyes, full of intensity and an odd mix of pain and dominance, were locked onto mine. I stumbled back a few steps, instinctively pulling on Max's leash as if he could somehow protect me from the storm of uncertainty swirling in my chest. My breath caught as the man pushed himself up with effort, his body tensing as if he was fighting against something beyond his physical state. His chest heaved with each breath, and though covered in dirt and grime, there was something undeniably powerful about the way he moved. The rough, jagged scars that marred his skin only added to the aura of a man who had lived through things I couldn't begin to understand. The cold wind picked up around us, sending a chill through my spine. Max growled low in his throat, sensing the danger that I still hadn't fully grasped. His voice came again, stronger now, though still hoarse. "You shouldn't have found me. But now that you have, I guess there's no going back." I didn't know whether to run or stay. I stood there, frozen, as he slowly stood, his height towering over me, his presence almost suffocating. I could barely bring myself to speak. Who are you?" My voice shook with disbelief, as if asking the question could somehow erase the reality of what was happening. His lips twisted into a half-smirk, and for a brief moment, I saw something in his eyes, a flicker of something softer, perhaps even regret. "My name is Antonio Romano," he said, as if I should recognize it. "But people call me Tony." The words felt like a punch to the gut. I didn't know much about the Mafia world, but the name alone carried weight. There was something ancient, almost mythical about it, a name that, despite being whispered in fear and reverence, was rarely spoken aloud. I took a shaky step backward, almost tripping over the uneven ground. The wind cut through the trees, but it was the silence that followed his words that felt louder than any storm. "You're not going anywhere," Tony said, his voice growing quieter but more commanding. My pulse quickened, and I fought to steady my breath. "What do you want from me?" The question barely escaped my lips before he answered, his eyes never leaving mine. "Everything," he said simply. "But first, you're going to help me get out of here." I wasn't sure what to do or how to react. I had just found a man buried in the dirt, a man who was now looking at me as if I was the answer to some puzzle he had yet to solve. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my feet stayed rooted to the spot, unwilling to leave him behind, even though I knew I should. Tony wasn't just any man. He was something else entirely, a force of nature, something far beyond the life I had ever known. And I had no idea what was coming next. But one thing was clear, my life was about to change, and there was no turning back. The tension between us was thick enough to cut with a knife, the kind of silence that filled every corner of the small clearing where we stood. I was still trying to make sense of what had just happened, my brain racing through 100 different possibilities. Was this some kind of twisted joke? Had I imagined the whole thing? But as Tony stood there, his eyes dark and unwavering, I knew this was real, far too real. I can't help you," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper, still struggling to form the words. "I don't even know who you are." He tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable, but his eyes, they were a storm, as if he could see right through me. "You already helped me, Emily," he said calmly, his voice rough but smooth, like gravel sliding over velvet. "You found me. That's enough for now." The way he said my name sent a chill down my spine. How did he know my name? I hadn't told him. I hadn't even thought to ask his. "I don't want to be involved in whatever you're tangled up in," I said, my heart pounding. "I just want to go home." But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they were futile. I wasn't going anywhere. Tony took a step closer, closing the distance between us, his gaze never leaving mine. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice low, almost intimate. "You've already stepped into my world. And once you're in, there's no going back." I shook my head, taking another step back, but my feet felt like they were glued to the ground. "I didn't ask for this," I said, frustration boiling up inside me. "I didn't ask to find you, or to be dragged into whatever this is." He regarded me for a long moment, his gaze calculating, like he was figuring out a puzzle. Then he sighed, as if my resistance was an inconvenience he'd rather not deal with. "No one ever asks for this, Emily," he replied, his tone softening just a fraction. "But sometimes life has other plans." I felt a sudden weight settle over me. The way he said my name again, it was different this time, almost as if he was claiming me. I knew, deep down, that I was already too far gone to back out now. "I won't make you a part of my world unless you want to be," he said, his eyes studying me closely. "But understand this. The moment you found me, you became important. And that changes things." I felt my stomach twist, my instincts screaming for me to run, to get away, but I was paralyzed by something I couldn't quite name. Fear? Curiosity? Or something else entirely? I don't know what to say to that. I whispered, my mind in a whirlwind of confusion. "You don't have to say anything," Tony replied, his voice steady and sure. "Just understand that there's no going back from here. Whatever happens next is out of your hands." And just like that, I realized something that made my breath catch in my throat. He wasn't just talking about the danger I might face. He was talking about me, about the strange connection we shared in that moment, as if our fates were already intertwined. It was as if I had no choice but to follow him, to see where this would lead. But as he took another step toward me, I knew this was only the beginning. I had no idea what was coming next, but I had this sinking feeling that whatever it was going to change everything. The next few days were a blur of confusion and uncertainty. Despite my initial desire to run, I found myself drawn back to Tony, compelled by something I couldn't name. He never forced me to stay, never demanded anything of me directly. Instead, he simply existed in a way that made it impossible for me to ignore him. I kept telling myself that I was just trying to help him get back on his feet, to make sure he wasn't as dangerous as he seemed. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I was starting to want something more, even if I couldn't admit it. Tony spent most of his time in his quiet, expensive apartment, never asking for much, just the occasional meal or a simple gesture. It was strange, but there was something about the way he carried himself that made it feel like I belonged there, like I had no choice but to stay. Maybe it was the way his presence filled the room, or the way he'd look at me, his intense eyes never wavering, always studying me as if he could read my every thought. One night, after I brought him dinner, he caught me off guard. "You're thinking too much," he said softly, his voice low and even. I froze, startled that he could see right through me. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "You're trying to figure out what to do next," he replied, his gaze never leaving mine. "But you already know the answer." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. He was right. I did know the answer, but admitting it aloud felt like stepping into a world that I wasn't ready for. "You're already part of this, Emily," Tony said, his voice quiet but sure. "Whether you like it or not." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. I tried to push them away, tried to convince myself that I could still leave, that this wasn't my life now. But I knew it was. No matter how much I resisted, I was tangled up in his world now. And no matter how much I tried to convince myself that I could escape, deep down, I understood. There was no turning back. Tony's world was dangerous, it was dark, and I had no idea what it would cost me to stay. But for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to walk away. Not when he looked at me like that. Not when he said things that made my heart race and my mind spin. I felt trapped, but it wasn't just because of him. It was because a part of me wanted to stay, wanted to be part of whatever this was between us. Every time I tried to push him away, he pulled me back in, never forcefully, but with that quiet intensity that made it impossible to ignore him. I wasn't sure what was happening to me, but I knew one thing for sure. I was already in too deep. It had been a week since Tony had come into my life, and every day felt like I was walking a tightrope between normalcy and a world I didn't understand. I woke up each morning with a strange sense of anticipation, knowing that no matter what I did, my life had already been altered beyond recognition. Tony remained a constant, always there, always watching, but never forcing his presence. I couldn't explain the pull he had on me, the way his quiet authority seemed to seep into my bones. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something deeper, something raw. He had this ability to make me feel like I was the only thing that mattered, and yet, at the same time, I was nothing at all. I wasn't sure how to reconcile those feelings. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a cup of coffee that had gone cold, Tony walked in, as silent as ever. He didn't say anything at first, just stood in the doorway, observing me with those sharp, unrelenting eyes. I couldn't help but shiver at the intensity of his gaze. It was as if he was reading me, piece by piece, in a way I couldn't escape. "You're quiet tonight," he said, his voice breaking the silence like a whip. I looked up, meeting his gaze, unsure of what to say. "I'm just thinking," I replied, my voice small. He tilted his head, stepping closer, and for the first time, I noticed the faintest trace of concern in his eyes. "About what?" he asked, his voice softening, though the edge never fully left. I hesitated, unsure if I should say what was on my mind. The truth was, I didn't know what was happening between us. I didn't know what I was feeling, what he was feeling, or even if he was feeling anything at all. "About how things have changed," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't sign up for any of this." Tony's expression remained unreadable, but he didn't pull away. He stepped closer, closing the distance between us. "You didn't sign up for it," he echoed. "But you're still here." I swallowed hard, unsure of where this conversation was going. "I don't know how to deal with all of this," I confessed. "It's like I'm stuck in a world I don't belong in." Tony regarded me silently for a moment, his eyes piercing through the confusion I couldn't hide. "You're not stuck," he said finally, his tone firm. "You're here because you chose to be." The words hit me like a wave, washing over me, but I wasn't sure if I could believe them. I wanted to argue, to tell him that I had no choice, but the truth was, I did. I had chosen to stay. I had chosen to be with him, To keep stepping further into a world I wasn't sure I could escape. I don't know what I'm doing anymore, I admitted, my voice trembling. Tony reached out then, his fingers brushing against mine in a gesture so soft it almost seemed out of place for someone like him. You're doing what you need to, he said quietly. That's all any of us can do. I looked up at him, my heart racing, unsure of where to go from here. The space between us felt charged, as if there was something unspoken hanging in the air, something neither of us wanted to address. But it was there, thick and undeniable. What happens next? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Tony didn't answer immediately. Instead, he just looked at me, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he spoke, his voice low and steady. What happens next is up to you, Emily, he said. And for the first time, I realized he wasn't just talking about our relationship. He was talking about everything. The choice was mine. I had already crossed a line. And now, I had to decide how far I was willing to go. The next few days felt like a constant pull between wanting to escape and being drawn closer to Tony. He was always around, always present, but he never pressured me, never forced me into anything. His quiet presence was both comforting and suffocating, and I couldn't decide which one it was. I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy in my life. I still worked, still kept up with the routines I had created for myself. But every time I thought about Tony, about the weight of his words, the way he made me feel seen in a way no one else ever had, I found myself questioning everything. I knew I was on the edge of something I didn't fully understand, and that terrified me. One evening, after I returned from work, I found Tony waiting for me in the living room. The lights were dim, and the air felt thick, heavy with unspoken things. He didn't say anything at first, just sat there, watching me as I walked in. His gaze was intense, almost too much to bear. It made my skin prickle, made me wonder if he could see straight into my soul. You're late, he said quietly, breaking the silence. I know, I replied, shrugging off my coat and tossing it onto the couch. I had a long day at work. Tony didn't respond immediately. He just stared at me, his expression unreadable. It was as if he was waiting for something, waiting for me to say something I wasn't sure I had the words for. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer this time, almost like he was searching for the right way to phrase what he wanted to say. You're avoiding me, he said, not accusing, but with an edge of quiet understanding. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I'm not avoiding you, I said quickly, but even as the words left my mouth, I realized how untrue they were. Of course, I was avoiding him. I was avoiding the truth of what was happening between us. Then why haven't you told me what you really want? Tony asked, his voice steady, but there was a certain edge to it now, something that hinted at frustration. I didn't know how to respond. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted either. Everything with Tony was confusing, overwhelming. He was part of a world I couldn't even begin to understand, and I was tangled up in it whether I liked it or not. But at the same time, there was a part of me that didn't want to let go, didn't want to leave. I looked down at the floor, struggling to find the right words, but they never came. I need to know where you stand, Emily. Tony continued, his voice unwavering. I can't keep waiting for you to figure this out on your own. His words felt like a weight on my chest, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I could feel my pulse quickening, my thoughts spinning. I don't know where I stand, I finally admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. There was a long silence between us, the kind that felt like it stretched on forever. Then, slowly, Tony stood up and walked toward me. He didn't say anything as he reached out and gently cupped my face in his hands, tilting my head up so I had no choice but to look at him. His touch was surprisingly tender, his fingers warm against my skin. You don't have to know everything right now, he said softly. Just know this, you're not alone in this. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. His words sent a shock through me, a rush of warmth that made everything else fade away. In that moment, I realized something. Maybe I wasn't alone in this after all. Maybe this wasn't the terrifying trap I thought it was. Maybe, just maybe, this could be something I could get used to. The thought terrified me, but at the same time, it comforted me in a way I didn't fully understand. I nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. He wasn't asking me to make a decision. He was just here, letting me take my time. And somehow that was enough. The days that followed felt like I was living in a dream, or perhaps a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Tony was always there, never forcing himself into my space. But somehow, he was always present, his presence looming over me like a constant, heavy fog. It was hard to get used to, harder still to pretend like everything was fine when every part of me was in turmoil. The thought of returning to my normal life, the life I had before I met him, seemed distant and unattainable. I still worked, still tried to keep up with everything I used to do. But every time I walked into my apartment, the weight of what I was becoming was there, in the air, in the quiet tension that stretched between us. He was a part of my world now, no matter how much I tried to fight it. One evening, as I sat on the couch, trying to catch up on work, I felt a presence behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. It was Tony, always watching, always there. He hadn't said a word when he walked in, but I could feel his gaze on me like a tangible force. "You've been quiet today," he finally said, breaking the silence that had stretched on too long. I looked up at him, surprised to hear his voice, though I wasn't sure what to say in response. "Just tired," I replied, offering a weak smile that didn't reach my eyes. Tony didn't move from where he stood, watching me closely, almost as if he were studying me. "You're not the same," he said quietly, his voice soft but intense. "You've changed." The words hit me like a blow, and I felt a pang of guilt. I wasn't the same. I knew that much. But what had changed? Was it him, or was it me? I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. How could I explain what I was feeling when I didn't fully understand it myself? "I didn't mean for things to get this complicated," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I didn't expect any of this." Tony took a slow step toward me, his expression unreadable, his eyes never leaving mine. "Complicated?" he repeated, as if he was testing the word, feeling it out. "Nothing about this is complicated, Emily." He paused, his gaze deepening. "You just don't want to admit it." I wasn't sure if he was right. I didn't want to admit it, didn't want to face the truth that had been staring me in the face for days. But the truth was unavoidable. I had already stepped into this world. There was no turning back now. "I don't know what I'm doing," I confessed, my voice thick with uncertainty. "But I can't pretend anymore. I can't pretend like I don't feel something." Tony's gaze softened just a fraction, but there was still that underlying intensity in his eyes. "You don't have to pretend," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're not alone in this, Emily. You never have been." His words stirred something deep inside me, something I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. I didn't want to feel connected to him, didn't want to admit how much he had come to mean to me, but it was there, undeniable. "What happens now?" I asked, the question hanging in the air like a fragile thread between us. Tony stepped closer, and for a moment, the world outside of this room seemed to disappear. "What happens now," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "is that you make a choice." I swallowed hard, my heart racing in my chest. The choice was mine. The choice had always been mine. But no matter what I decided, I knew one thing for certain. There was no going back. I spent the next few days in a daze, feeling like I was constantly walking on the edge of something I couldn't control. I'd wake up every morning with a knot in my stomach, my thoughts swirling around everything Tony had said. I had to make a choice, but the more I thought about it, the more confused I became. There were moments when I wanted to run, to leave everything behind and try to pick up the pieces of my life again. But there were also moments when I couldn't. Imagine leaving Tony behind. He had become an undeniable part of my life, even though I didn't fully understand why. Tony never pushed me, never demanded anything from me. He gave me space, time to think, but always remained close enough that I knew I wasn't alone. He didn't say much, but his presence was always there, like a quiet force that never let me forget that I had made a choice by staying. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, trying to focus on a report from work, Tony came in, his footsteps soft but sure. I didn't need to look up to know it was him. The air around me shifted the moment he entered the room. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, his gaze fixed on me. I could feel his eyes on my back, like a weight I couldn't shake off. "You're thinking too much," he said quietly, his voice breaking the silence that had filled the room. I finally looked up at him, surprised to hear him speak, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. "You've been distant," he added, his voice soft but steady. "Is that what you really want?" The question hit me harder than I expected. "I don't know," I replied, my voice barely audible. "I don't know what I want." Tony didn't move, but I could feel him closing the space between us without a single step. His gaze softened, but there was still that underlying intensity. "You don't have to have all the answers, Emily," he said, his voice low and steady. "You just have to decide what you want from here." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that felt impossible to ignore. I wanted to scream, to throw my hands up and tell him I couldn't do it, that I wasn't ready for whatever this was. But at the same time, I wanted to stay. I wanted to see where this would go, even if I had no idea what it was. "I don't know how to be in this world," I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. "I don't know how to be a part of it." Tony took a step closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "You don't have to be anything but yourself," he said softly. "That's enough." His words wrapped around me like a warm blanket, offering a comfort I wasn't sure I deserved. But there was something in his voice, in the way he looked at me, that made me believe him. Maybe I wasn't as lost as I thought. Maybe I could figure this out. I didn't know how or when, but for the first time in days, I felt like I might actually have the strength to face whatever was coming next. The silence between us stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful, as if we were both waiting for something that neither of us had yet named. "You're not alone in this," Tony said again, his voice barely a whisper. "Whatever happens, I'll be here." And for the first time, I believed him. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. The days following that conversation were both calming and unsettling. Tony was always there, like a steady presence I couldn't escape, but for the first time, it didn't feel suffocating. It felt safe. I found myself letting my guard down, bit by bit, each moment spent with him slowly erasing the doubts I had. We talked more, but it wasn't always about the big things. Sometimes it was just the small, mundane conversations that made me realize how much I had come to rely on him. His quiet strength, his confidence. It was like a safety net I didn't know I needed. I still struggled with the idea of being a part of his world, but Tony never pushed me. He let me take my time, as if he knew that I had to come to terms with everything on my own. There was no rush, no pressure, and in a strange way, that gave me a sense of peace. But the peace was fleeting. One evening, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection, wondering who I had become. I had changed, and not just because of Tony. My thoughts, my fears, they were all starting to shift. I wasn't sure if I was ready to embrace this new version of myself, but I couldn't deny that she was becoming real. As I turned away from the mirror, I heard Tony's footsteps behind me. He had this way of moving that was both silent and commanding. It was as if the air around him shifted. Whenever he entered a room, "You're thinking again," he said, his voice low, but there was a softness to it, an understanding that made me pause. I didn't turn around. I wasn't sure I wanted to face him just yet. "Just trying to figure things out," I replied, my voice almost a whisper. "You don't need to figure everything out," he said gently. "You're here now? That's enough." His words sank into me, like a reassurance I hadn't realized I needed. Slowly, I turned to face him, my heart racing as I met his gaze. "I don't know if I'm ready," I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "Ready for what?" Tony asked, his expression softening. "For whatever this is," I said, my hands trembling slightly. "For you. For me. For this life." There was a long pause, but instead of the distance I expected, Tony stepped closer, his presence enveloping me. He didn't say anything at first, just reached out and gently cupped my face, lifting my chin so I was looking directly at him. "You don't have to be ready," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm here. That's all you need to know." His words felt like a promise, something deep and unwavering. And in that moment, for the first time since meeting him, I allowed myself to believe it. I wasn't alone anymore. Whatever happened next, whatever this was, I was no longer facing it on my own. Tony was right. I didn't need to figure everything out. All I needed was to take one step forward, to trust that I was making the right choice, even if I didn't know where it would lead. And with that, I stepped forward, into the unknown, knowing that the choice was mine to make, and that I wasn't alone in it.